Whether you grew up in the city, country, or suburbs, most of us have deep emotions imprinted in our memories as to the place where we're from. In BT's Neighborhood, we'll investigate two questions: who am I and whose am I? These questions, we hope, will point us in a more distinct direction of knowing how to live into the greatest commandment: to love the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, and soul, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. How can we love those around us, especially those who challenge or oppose us, if we don't even know who we are or how to express love for God, others, and ourselves? So take a walk with us, learn where to buy your groceries, and where to find a good conversation. This podcast is brought to you by Wesleyan University in conjunction with the Office of Spiritual Life. We want to welcome you to the neighborhood.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of BT's Neighborhood right here on the campus of Wesleyan University. I am your host, Gerald Coleman, known as Pastor G around the neighborhood. And I'm so glad that you've taken a break to listen in, or maybe you're not taking a break. Maybe you're getting some work done and choosing to listen in while you work, and I'll take that too. But glad that you can join us for another episode in our series where we have been talking about becoming. When we learn to be with God, who we are comes forth. And it's really a conversation around vocation and calling. And we've had 4 movements to this theme. And the first movement is knowing God. The second movement is knowing how God designed you. The third movement is knowing your station. And the fourth movement is navigating the unknown. And here to help us delve into this fourth movement a bit is my friend, mentor, a guy whom I highly respect. He's been on the podcast and he's here to join us again this season. Please welcome Dr. Richard Middleton.
It's so great to be back on this podcast. Thank you for having me, Gerald.
It's an honor. Thank you for making time. We've been having this conversation about vocation and calling, and I wonder if you can give us a few words on, just a few thoughts on vocation, calling. What is it, what it isn't?
Yeah, in the Christian tradition, often the idea is that everybody just neutrally lives in the world, but God calls some people to a special task, a religious vocation. And so we'd often talk about Christian ministry as what God calls you to, and we put the ministry in quotes, and we'd use the scare quotes with our fingers to say, well, we know that there's more ministers than that, but really that's a special way God calls you. But really, to be a human being is to be called to live in a certain way, in a relationship with the creator of the universe, on the earth, wherever we are placed. And there's a vocation or a calling that comes with being human. The way I understand Christianity is that Christianity is God repairing what's gone wrong with human life and the world. And so the Christian calling is really a restart on your calling as a human being. So Jesus is the full image of God because he manifested what it meant to be fully human. And he said, anyone who's seen me has seen the Father. Well, let your light so shine before people that they can look at you and they see God. They give witness to God by who you are. That's the human calling, to be renewed as a human being and live righteously in everything that you do. From the so-called high calling of something like church ministry down to changing the baby's diaper at 2 a.m. or advocating on behalf of marginalized people in our society. All of that is a human calling and everything in between.
So really there is no distinction of high calling and low calling. It's something that we've created.
Yes, we have imposed a bifurcated lens of the sacred and the secular upon the world and upon human life, which is not found in the Bible.
That's good. I think about growing up and having, these thoughts about, man, what is God calling me to? And thinking about it in that sacred secular lens and not really seeing that, man, the whole world, it kind of, when I understood that there was no divide, it kind of made everything seem like an adventure of sorts.
Yes.
Of like, oh, this is exciting. Wait a minute, I can bring glory to God doing this. Mm-hmm. And I remember I always tell this story. I think Larry Bird helped me to see this. He had just finished playing a game against Michael Jordan. You know, Michael Jordan was Michael Jordan. I think the Celtics still beat the Bulls, but at the end of the game, you know, Larry Bird, his response was, "I think I saw God play basketball." And you know, some people would see that as, wait a minute, that's blasphemous. But I think what he was trying to say, that I saw basketball played to such a level that I've never seen it, that, you know, the only thing he could equate it to was if God played it would look like this. I kind of see that calling and vocation as something like that, is whatever we discover it to do, we do with the best of our abilities, that it makes people think and reflect, and it points them toward God.
Right. I think it's important, though, to qualify what you say there. So it's not just excellence according to our standards, like the best basketball player, but if you take kids just starting out, or even kids with developmental disabilities playing basketball, you can see God too.
Yeah, that's good. That's a great qualifier.
So to be in God's image is to be called to act and live in a certain way in the world in accordance with our abilities. So before the calling comes a gift that God first has given us, the identity of being His image. No matter who we are, no matter what our abilities, even if we have all kinds of what society would call defects, physical or mental or otherwise, God can still shine through if, to the extent of our ability, you know, we live in the presence of God and do what we can. So that's the point I want to make. I started out thinking of the image of God in terms of ability and excellence and calling to act in the world, because I was a very passive adolescent and I needed to get beyond myself into this adventure of life. So image of God as the calling to have agency, to make a difference and move out of your comfort zones was very important to me. But for many people who are aggressive type A personalities, maybe the image of God has to do with receiving the grace and not trying to achieve quite as much. You know, it varies. This has sparked a debate among biblical scholars and theologians about how we talk about the image of God. So, for example, a recent book called Being God's Image by Carmen Imes, which I wrote the foreword to, says we're not created in the image of God, whatever that might mean. That can lead you astray. Just say we are the image of God. By who we are, no matter who we just are the image of God. That's our way to get to the point that the image of God is a gift as well as a calling. On the other hand, John Kilner, I think that's his name, wrote a book called Dignity and Destiny, where he says, we simply have dignity by being human. The image of God is our destiny. It's what we're called to be and to do in the eschaton. We will become the image of God. And that's his way of guarding human dignity, by separating it from the image of God, whereas Cameron Imes puts it in. So there's different ways to talk about it, as long as you understand that you do not debase anyone in their humanity because they're different from what you think is the norm.
Yes.
That's important.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate that. So how would you say one goes about discovering their vocation? For some, it's this very, it almost can, I guess it can put you in a place of where you're walking on pins and needles of like, I got to figure out the one thing. Should it be that stressful?
So now you're using vocation in a third sense. You have this religious sense of calling. You have this general sense of being human. Now you have the sense of your specific tasks in life. And that sense of vocation comes from the Enlightenment, where we secularize the idea of the religious vocation. So the professions, where the medicine and education and so on, and law, those are your vocations. Well, if you want to figure out what you should be doing, you have to first look at your gifts and look at the situation you're in and what the needs are. So the famous statement by Frederick Buechner is that when you put together your deep joy and the world's deep needs, then you have your vocation. That connection. Now, the only way to really discover what your gifts are, what meets your needs well, is to be in community and have other people discern. You know, I was an undergraduate student in Jamaica doing a theological degree, not knowing what I want to do with my life. That's why I started studying theology. I was just interested in it. And about age 20, people said, you know what? You can teach. You can communicate. You're helping people with their exams, with their papers. You're preaching in church. I started from age 17 preaching in church. So you can preach, and you can communicate. Maybe that's one of my gifts that I should think about using. How would I use that? In what context? Because you can teach in lots of different contexts. You can teach as a pastor, go to high school, go to elementary. You can do nonprofit consulting. You can do all kinds of stuff. You can go to university, whatever. So I didn't know what context. And as I went through life, new opportunities arose to teach in multiple different contexts. And look at this. I've ended up in Rochester, New York, at Roberts Wesleyan and Northeastern for 21, coming on 22 years. I'd never thought I'd ended up there. So the thing is, you can't predict the future. The future is about taking what you have and seeing what the needs are and saying, how can I meet those needs? And then you move into the future step by step.
I have to be careful because I can go off on tangents with you.
Go ahead, brother.
And not talk about our topic for today. But that's just how much I enjoy talking with you and learning from you. But our theme today is navigating the unknown, living life, and maybe life is going to according to how you planned it or hoped it will, or it would.
It does go that way for you?
No.
That way for me, man.
No. Maybe if I plan what I want to get up and eat in the morning, maybe to that extent. But what do you do when life throws you a curveball, which it often does, and maybe there's no script of how you get through that? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, let me give you an example from my life, then try and generalize about it. So I had wanted, after my graduate degrees, to return to Jamaica and teach there at the same seminary that I studied at. And I actually had a contract, but my son was born that year, and I said, let's put it off for a year. And then somehow the contract fell through. They couldn't find it after the first year. So it happens in the majority world, right? Yeah. So I said, what am I going to do? Well, I wanted to go back and teach, but let me find something I can do here. And I had been a campus minister, so I said, let me apply for some campus ministry jobs. And I did that for a couple of years and then got into teaching a little later. Or another time when I started a PhD program at Syracuse University, and boy, it crashed and burned in the first year. And I had to figure, what am I going to do? And I looked around and saw that Colgate Rochester Divinity School had a program, but I already had a master's degree, but I still took some courses. I commuted. That was my foot in the door to get back to Rochester. I could never have predicted it. So you have to discern what's the very next step. You can't discern the entire trajectory. You can just watch the next step. And the question is, how can I take a next step that is faithful to the story so far that I'm a part of? And I like to quote Alistair McIntyre, the Christian ethicist, who said, I can only answer the question, what am I to do, if I can first answer the question, what story I'm a part of. And so what's the Christian narrative about? What's the framework of meaning, the depth of meaning that I am part of, that I inhabit? And how does it tell me I ought to live? That doesn't give me specifics for the choices I must make, but it gives me a sense of guidance for what is a good choice, what is a bad choice in my situation, and also the discernment of my gifts. So basically, my entire life has been about stepping into the unknown. And it seems stable for the last while, being in Rochester, teaching 10 years at Roberts Wesleyan, and then about 11 or so at Northeastern. It seems stable, but even then, every year something changes, new opportunities come, and you have to discern what you should do. And that's small change compared to a program that crashes and burns, or a contract to go back and teach my home country that doesn't work out. Those are big changes, and you have to discern what's coming next. So the future is about improvisation.
Improv.
We can talk about improv,
Yeah. When I think of improv, I think of jazz music, Coltrane. I can hear some people back home saying, we don't call them Coltrane, we call them Train. But I could just think about, those different songs that he recorded, and where he's playing something set, but then he just improvises and goes somewhere melodious. But I guess as Christians, the key to improv or improvisation is knowing what the story is. How do you, what are some tips that you could give us for being rooted and grounded in the Christian story?
So let me first clarify this point you make, because it's really crucial. Many people think of improvisation as just trying anything. But improvisation, to be a good jazz improviser, means you have to know the music really, really well. You have to have memorized every possible scale. And all the dissonant scales as well. And so you have a repertoire you can draw upon, and you put them together as you feel. But they're so intuitive, you don't have to think about it, you just draw upon them. And I used to like to watch Whose Line Is It Anyway when it was on. It's improv, right?
Yeah.
It's not improv theater, but it's improv TV. And you know that these characters, they would memorize routines, multiple routines. And then as they would improvise, they would draw on lines from the routines. And one of the things about improv is they say you have to always say yes, and you accept what comes before, and then you take it in the next direction. And this goes back to, I think it's a quote from Miles Davis that a friend of mine likes to put in his emails. He says, when you hit a wrong note, it's only wrong depending on what the next note is that you play. Because you can integrate that into what's coming next. So you say, okay, I hit a wrong note. Yes, okay, let's accept that. Let's not get upset. Let's accept that. And let's say, what's next that can make it better, that can move it in a better direction? So improvisation requires depth knowledge of a tradition. And improvising from out of the biblical story means you got to know that story. You got to inhabit that story. You got to understand its plot, where it's going. You got to be in touch with the author, the Holy Spirit. You got to also know the details of the story. So the example I like to give is Bob Marley, who he's writing songs on all kind of topics, and he just bring in biblical lines from different places because he knows it so well. So he's writing a song about critiquing power, and he says, if you are the big tree, we are the small axe ready to cut you down. That's from Proverbs, you know? You know, he just brings stuff in and use it because it's relevant, because he has this repertoire. He understands the story, and he says, that was like this, so I connect it. So we have to think of how we can live out of that narrative toward a future that is genuinely unscripted. We don't have a lot of instructions in the Bible. How do we approach AI? How do you we don't know. How do we approach genetic engineering? We don't know. How do we approach all these things? We don't know. We don't have the specifics about it, you know. So we have to know that story and then live in accordance, in harmony with that story, while taking bold, risky steps. And we may be wrong, and we have to correct our course.
Man, wow. We could keep going here, but we got to bring it to a close here. I want to thank you so much for being with us, and hopefully we'll get to have you back again where we can tie up some loose ends. This was really good. Or maybe we leave them untied, right? But thank you so much, Dr. Middleton, for being with us. We appreciate you, and I want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in. Don't forget to give us some feedback. Let us know how you're enjoying these podcasts. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll see you next time in BT's Neighborhood.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of BT's Neighborhood, where we aim for simple but deep conversations about being a good neighbor here and now at Roberts Wesleyan, and wherever our paths take us in the future.